Hi guys, today I'm going to be talking about 10 books that really mean a lot to me, and more so than just meaning a lot to me, they're also very beautifully put on this canvas that my mom has so wonderfully put together. It is a design by Patti Mann called Armful of Books, and my mom also had help from Amy Bunger for some of the stitches because this is a personalized canvas. These are the books that I have chosen rather than just like general ones. Before I launch into the 10 books and why they're on here, I'm going to give you a quick little zoom in of the whole thing so you can really see the details, and then I'll get right into discussing what they're all about. Without further ado, let's get into the 10 books that changed my reading life. So, first up we have Paradise, which is by Toni Morrison. Now, I love Toni Morrison. I read Paradise, it was my first Toni Morrison book. I read it in junior year in a class called Feminist Fictions. I wrote my junior paper on Paradise and Beloved. I don't understand why more people don't read Paradise. Toni Morrison's super popular, but Paradise is like not her most popular book by far. I absolutely love it. It's all about intersectionality. There's an all-black town. There's an all-women convent. You know one of the women at the convent is white, but you never know which one. And so you can never tell if someone's being racist, if they're being sexist, if they're being racist and sexist. It's just really, really interesting. It really opened my eyes to Toni Morrison as an author, and she's become one of my all-time favorites. And it also made me think more critically about intersectionality in feminism, and I think that was really important to me as a person, so that just completely changed the game for me. Next up, I have Station 11, which you can see has this cute night sky with a little tent, just like the thing. The grass is there. I read Station 11 at the beginning of the pandemic, and the beginning of the pandemic was a really rough time. I was feeling kind of lonely. This book, despite being about like a pandemic and the aftermath, gave me a lot of hope. I think it's beautifully written, and it also just kind of shows the resilience of humans, and I think I really needed a book that said even at the bleakest of times, like, people are going to be okay and figure it out, and I just needed that in my life. And it just helped me get through kind of one of the toughest times of the pandemic for me, and I think that's super important. Next up, we have a book by Rushdie, and that is Midnight's Children. This is a book that I read my senior year. I read it for a class on the Booker. I haven't read a ton of books written by Indian authors, so I thought it was really interesting. It also kind of opened my eyes to magical realism and how amazing that could be. I think it gave me a lot of confidence that I could handle books that seemed to be tougher, they seemed to be bigger, that I didn't have to know every single thing about the historical context to really enjoy a book. I really respect the craft that goes into this book, and I think it just made me become a more critical thinker and to really take the time to look at the different layers of a book, and I think that's really important, and it's a book that I really hold dear, and that whole class actually meant a lot to me. I think that was one of my favorite classes of my entire undergraduate career, and that was my favorite book from that class, so it means a lot to me, and it'll always have good memories because of that class. Next up, we have the Goldfinch, and I want to show you the little bird peeking out because it is so cute. I think my mom did a really great job getting that font right and having the little bird, but I really love the Goldfinch. I think it's a perfect example of a really, really long book that just captures your attention the whole way through. I think I read it in a 2-day period, and I just absolutely devoured it. I really do love a long story. I love a Bildungsroman, and I love a character-driven rather than a plot-driven book, which definitely the Goldfinch is. And again, I think that this is a book that made me realize, like, no, I don't have to be scared when a book is 700 pages, because that doesn't mean I won't love it and read it faster than like some 400 pages books or even 200-page books, because I really read this in 48 hours. And so I think it just gave me a lot of confidence. It also was a lot of fun to then like go to the movie and have different opinions and like talk to people about it. It was also really fun because a lot of people have read it despite how like long and literary it is. So I could have a lot of conversations with a lot of different people who don't necessarily read a lot of the stuff I do, and we could talk about it, and it's kind of a entry point for people who are readers, not readers, different kinds of readers, and so we can all kind of talk about the Goldfinch because it seems like everyone has read it. Next up, we have Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Now, despite the fact that J.K. Rowling is like the worst and we dislike her and I don't ever want to give her my money again, this doesn't give her money, so it's fine. I would be lying if I didn't say that the Harry Potter books really started my love for reading. I've read the entire series, I think 2 or 3 times. I think it just showed me the magic of fantasy. It showed me how much a series can really mean to you, how it can like grow with you over the years. I just have so many memories of all the Halloweens I dressed up as Hermione, and my favorite of those books is The Goblet of Fire, and so I did just want to give it a shout out for everything it's done for me, and I think it really kick-started my reading journey, and I would be like remiss not to tip my hat to those books, particularly because it also kind of showed me how much I love a like game or a tournament in a fantasy. I mean, I'm just a sucker for those. Okay, next up we have the Darker Shade of Magic series by V.E. Schwab. Now look at how great my mom did that symbol. That's basically the symbol on the front cover of the first book. But anyway, this is a series I think I read 2 or 3 years ago. Absolutely entrancing. V.E. Schwab is one of my all-time favorite authors. I think she's a brilliant writer. She's an auto-buy author for me, and so I just have to put her on here because she kind of continued my fantasy love as an adult, because for a while there, as I was transitioning from a high schooler into a college student who was reading a lot of serious literary works, I was reading YA fantasy and I was feeling a little disillusioned. Sometimes I had a hard time with the writing, sometimes I had a hard time with the world building, and they just weren't cutting it for me anymore, but I was still a little daunted by adult fantasy, and I think V.E. Schwab, depending on whether it's YA or adult fantasy that she's writing, I think both of them are written very, very well. Interesting, entertaining, there's high stakes. I love how she always wants her characters to be morally gray. Sort of rekindled my love for fantasy when I was starting to get a little like snooty and high and mighty about how like fantasy just wasn't cutting it for me anymore now that I'd grown up, and it reintroduced me to like, no, you can love fantasy as an adult, and there's nuanced takes and all of that, because there really are, and like I really do just love a good fantasy. Okay, next up we have Normal People. And Normal People, you gotta shout it out. I think it's something that my friends and I talk about a lot. We have a really good time discussing Sally Rooney. I think the literary community has a fun time discussing Sally Rooney, particularly through the lens of like what it means to be a white female author. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to be said about, whether you love her or you hate her, she is doing something interesting that, like, I think white men for the longest time have just been able to write books about them being like disaffected, sad, whatever, and women just haven't been allowed that for so long, and so she just writes books about it, and I think that's great, and I think she gets a little bit of heat for it because it's like, why do we care about this white woman's troubles? But I'm like, why do we care about those white men troubles all those times? Like, Great Gatsby, man. Just think about the Great Gatsby. That's just a white dude who had some problems, okay? So I'm here for it. I'm here for the female take, and I think she does a great job, and honestly, I love a good Sally Rooney discussion. Okay, next up is Northanger Abbey by Austen. So you'll see my mom has drawn a little Abbey, which I think is very, very cute. Austen in general is one of my favorite authors. I took a class on Austen, which is also one of my favorite classes of all time in college, and Northanger Abbey was by far my favorite, but I do really love all the other ones. I think Austen is a master. I love her. I'll swear by her. But Northanger Abbey is my favorite. It's kind of a hat tip to Gothic literature. I've talked about it in some other videos, but it's a great work. And again, another underrated one. I think it's probably the most underrated Austen work. And so I wanted to give it a shout out because it deserves it. Next up, Great Expectations. Now, Great Expectations means a lot to me, not only because I'm a huge Dickens fan, but also because my dad used to read me books when I was little, so like picture books when I was really, really little, but as I started to become an elementary school and a middle schooler, he and I would sit down and read for, 10 minutes, 30 minutes every single night. And after we got through picture books, we picked up No Fear Shakespeare, and then we started doing stuff like Sherlock Holmes stories, but also we started Great Expectations. And I remember absolutely love reading Great Expectations with my dad. I have such good memories of sitting down and like he'd read some, I'd read some. I loved the story. I found it really entertaining. It was a long haul because it's a big book and we were only reading it out loud in small chunks. So it was a like long period of my life where my dad and I were getting through this book. And I thought I was so fancy because I was not only handling this like classic work of literature, but I was actually liking it. And so I think that was one of the like things that kickstarted and said, no, I want to study English. This is something I'm about. I can handle these classics. They're not all old and crusty. Like some of them are really exciting and fun. Okay, and then lastly, we have Middlemarch, which is another classic that I really, really love that I actually never read in school. Not in high school, not in college. I read it for book club, which I will link our book club blog down below. But it is a book club that I created with two of my fellow Harvard grads. Both of them study English. We absolutely love reading. Like we're all kind of nuts, and when the pandemic hit, we felt kind of sad because all of a sudden we didn't have these discussion sections to read books, show up and talk about books. So we basically made our own. And so we read, or we still do, read about a book a week, although Middlemarch we did take 3 weeks on. You will have to forgive us. And Middlemarch I really, really loved. It's like right up my alley. I'm so glad I finally read it, and it meant a lot to me that I was able to talk about it with my fellow book clubbers. But also the book club in general just meant so much because it was a way for me to connect with people. It filled kind of the void that I had of leaving college, both because it became virtual and then because I had graduated. It was a way to stay in touch with people that really matter to me, but also it just feels so great to have a place and a space to sit down and talk about books and, you know, engage in discussion with other people whose opinions I trust, although don't always align with mine. So while I do respect their opinions and really like what they have to say, it's not that we all just show up and nod our heads because we all have the same thoughts, because we're all different people and we have different preferences, and book club has been one of the things that has helped me get through the pandemic. So I thought it deserved a little shout out on my book canvas. All right guys, so those are the 10 books, and if you want, have a good old look-see at it because there really are so many beautiful details. All right guys,